I'm so delighted to introduce my guest today, Professor Massimiliano Guido. He is an expert in the fields of historical performance practice and improvisation. He's going to talk to me today about a wide range of topics, including counterpoint, partimento, music theory, music history, and much more. He is the editor of Studies in Historical Improvisation from Cantare Super Librum to Partimenti. Professor Guido, welcome to the Nikhil Hogan Show.
Thank you, Nikhil, and it's a pleasure for me to be here.
It's really a thrill to have you, and always great to have an expert on historical improvisation and music history on the show to explain how it was so different in the past and how they learned music so much differently from the way it was taught in the 20th century versus back then. But before we dive into that, could you just give me a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, I started as an organist. When I was 7, I told my mom, I want to play organ. And she replied, well, we're going to buy you a piano. And I say, no, I want an organ. And, that was the beginning of the end, as we say. Then I graduated as an organ soloist at Parma Conservatory. And in the meanwhile, I began studying musicology in Cremona at Pavia University. Then I had the fortune of meeting Edoardo Bolotti and Bill Porter at the Smarano Organ Academy during the summer when I was a student back in the 1996-97, if I recall correctly. And, I got infected with this new approach of teaching that was combining the technique of the instrument and the old way of learning that included improvisation. Then I moved to Sweden for my Master of Art degree with Hans Davidsson and Joe Pestra and others, and back to Italy for doing my PhD in musicology. And then I moved to Canada, working with Peter Schubert on historical improvisation and counterpoint. And back again across the pond, this time as a research assistant, a postdoc, again at my actual university in Pavia, and now I'm a professor back there. So it's a long story, made short.
And wow, so many big names along the way too. Actually, can I just ask you a quick question about your style of play, the way you learned organ before these so-called older approaches? Did you improvise when you were learning at the beginning?
No, and I was taught not to do so because I had to stick to the page, so to say. And of course, that was a big mistake because, I learned to play in an inflexible way, the way that has to give all the notes that are written on the score, but nothing more and nothing less. And it took, quite a lot of time to change this way of thinking and also way of acting with the body. Because when you are disconnecting harmony, counterpoint, you are placing them just on the table in front of you as a piece of paper, and you have to detach your body from what you're doing. It's more complicated, as we have learned in so many ways during the last decades. Then I must say I was improvising because I also served as cathedral organist for about 20 years. And during the liturgy, you are still free to filling the gaps, simply. So I developed my own style. I had an historical organ, a 19th century Italian historical organ, under my fingers, but I was really much more preoccupied to be coherent within the style of the celebration. So there was a lot of Gregorian chant, where there was some polyphony, there was some contemporary awful Italian style songs in the nave, and I was trying to develop my own style. So, improvisation can be used in so many ways. And one of them is just to be creative and to respond to what you are hearing around you. And that was basically what I started to do. I cannot define a style. It was something like Messiaen sometime. It was more modal and flag out. Sometimes it sounded like French Baroque or Italian opera. I don't know, I was playing around. It was in a way cheerful. And this was anyway felt as a good thing from the audience, from the congregation.
They liked
because,
it.
Yeah, they like it, because you take something that they know and then you elaborate on it in a way that this music chunk becomes something else. And this is another aspect of improvisation that is crucial in the way of learning and way of doing it.
Well, did you, Professor Guido, did you learn any theory as you were on your way to becoming an organ performer? Did you learn theory? And if so, what kind of theory did you know?
Oh yes. Organ studies in Italy are still called organo e improvvisazione organistica e composizione organistica. Sorry. So the programs that were shaped around 1930s, they had a strong part in theory. We had to write fugues in 2 parts and in 3 parts. We had to write a motet for solo, voice, and organ accompaniment. We had to prepare a florid counterpoint, but everything was, written down. And we were, of course, allowed to use piano during our segregation. That was the exam was, you had to be locked in a room for 8 hours or 12 hours, depending on if it were the diploma or the 8th year, and you had to compose actually. We were taught in a very old-fashioned way, meaning Gedalge or Dubois or that kind of treatises developing from a later tradition. But yes, definitely, okay. we learned how to compose.
Okay, so now I'm very interested to know about when you made the switch, so to speak. So is that when you met William Porter and Eduardo Bolotti?
Basically, yes. I must say that I was more interested in the playing and in widening my understanding of the historic repertoire. But working with Eduardo, I also studied harpsichord with him privately, preparing my harpsichord diploma. You cannot make one day with him without being inventive, without being improvisatory. And so I started looking at the repertoire in a different way, as models, and I started to study in a different way. Instead of keep repeating the same piece of music, I was trying to understand the modules, and I was trying to go along with them and let my fingers understand what they were doing. If they had, if they had a brain, if they had an independent brain. So that was the changing moment, I guess.
Did you have to learn? Was it all oral, or was there some theoretical basis for the approach that perhaps Professor Bolotti was using?
Since I am an historical musicologist, I love to read old books and treatises. So I was delving into Dirutas, Pennas, and all Banchieris, and all other Italian guys who were talking about a profession. They were talking about how to make these young people capable of making a life with improvisation and with their profession. And we were discussing. But then the most important theoretical work was the music itself. as it is so clear now, after years of studies, after colleagues like Giorgio Sanguinetti and others have shown that there is this wonderful tradition on unwritten theory. That is even more important. But we have to understand also historically that the world changed, and that the German perspective of the way of teaching and harmony, the way of telling us how the composers and how the musicians work, has deeply influenced our understanding of their sources. And so we were a lot skeptical that these, lines of music without text could teach us something also in music theory.
You mentioned a name, Girolamo Diruta, and
Yes.
that's a name that people might not know who that is. Could you explain who is that, and what has he contributed that's of significance and importance for us?
Well, it was an Italian organist and composer that was active in the late Renaissance, and he was in Venice. He was working within the circle of the Gabrielis, Andrea and Giovanni Gabrielis. He was working with Claudio Merulo. So he was at the peak of one of the most important style in music making, and in one of the best musical centers, Venice. So he wrote one of the most important tutors for wannabe organists. And it's one of the first, along with L'arte de Tanier Fantasia by Thomas de Santa Maria, that tries to put on paper in a fictional way a dialogue that is happening between a master and a student. We know that the transmission, the transferal of knowledge was made in person, in body and flesh at the keyboard. But at the meantime, these people had to earn money, and printed books have been invented, and there was a market for it. You were able to reach many more people than having private lessons. And if you publish something, you also became more famous, and pupils were coming to you. It's happening also now. We are using internet, and there are colleagues who are teaching online. Well, Diruta was publishing online a fictional dialogue that you had everything that you needed for becoming a good organist there.
Right.
That's why it's so important. And he was combining also the keyboard technique. He starts from the keyboard technique for the way that you are touching the organ in order to make a good sound. And then he is elaborating on it, giving examples, and making your mind and your body going through this path that goes from technique to diminutions to counterpoint to whatever you need for being a good organist. That was being able to answer the choir. And for answering the choir, you need to know to play a cadence in the right tone. So he gives you a sort of guided tour in the church tones, and he gives you a tour in all the viable transpositions possible on a mean tone organ for answering the choir. And then he gives you some examples of valentuomini, meaning the good maestri. And then he piles up notions in a way that is natural and is extremely coherent with that period. Of course, as all historical sources, you have to be critical in reading them, in deciphering them, and in applying them to a totally different environment and context.
Can I take a step back? He had a teacher, Claudio Merulo, I think you mentioned him. He was also extremely famous for his innovative keyboard music and his ensemble writing. Could you talk about him now? Because I think, didn't he have a kind of connection to Bach through Sweelinck? Is that right?
Well, these kind of guys were the most important instrumentalists in their era. And of course, they were publishing. Claudio Merulo has a wonderful book printed by Verovio. And it's the music was traveling because these were considered the most important musicians at the time. So it's clear that we know that many people were coming to Venice to be their students, and then they came back to the north. So what is important in Merulo is that he is creating these elaborate large toccatas that are very rich in diminutions. And they are like living creatures that are developing around the church. Just imagine the San Marco Basilica in Venice with this large resonant space that has to be filled with harmony. And one of the most important concepts in the late Renaissance is euphony. Everything has to sound well and round and assuring that it's a sonic representation of the wellness and of your well-being as a creature of God. So that's why consonances are so important. And then when you want to create a little brisk, you have to go for dissonances. And in the Italian organ of the Renaissance, there is this very light texture made from the ripieno, which is the upper ranks of the harmonics that are built on the principale scalings, the main pipe type of the organ. And if you are playing a mean-tone organ in a very large resonant environment, if you are playing a 3/5 chord, the mean tone temperament and the space makes this chord bigger and bigger and steadier. So you have a lot of beauty, like the sun coming through the windows and just reflected on the gold mosaics. And then when you have a diminished fourth, for instance, or another dissonant interval, it is really dissonant. It is really harsh. It's a perturbation of what you are feeling. And they were playing with that. They were placing dissonances in the right place in order to create movement, to create a little perturbation in the sky.
Let's talk a little bit now. You were mentioning consonances and dissonances. Just another quick question before we dive deeper into that, which is the idea of modes. And now I think, I'm a little bit familiar with the partimento in the 18th century, and we have major and minor. I'm a little bit confused about modes. Were there 8 or 12 church modes? And predominantly how did they think of tonality back then?
Well, they didn't think about tonality. That's a short.
That's thing. A fetish thing, right? In the 19th century.
And at a certain time there were 8 modes, and at another time there were 12 modes, depending on the temporal level. But to make a long story short, every theoretical system is developed because of a practical need. So when you work in a church And the repertoire of the church, the main voice of the church, is organized according tonaries that were, a sort of collections of pieces that were sung at the introit of the mass, or antiphons that were sung at the Magnificat, and so forth, so on. You had to organize these melodies in order to be able to pick them and to memorize them and to work with them as a basis for something else. The church modes were organized in 8 plagal and authentic modes, and this is the basic. So every organist knew that the choir was singing, for instance, an antiphon in the first mode, usually starting on D, and that he had to make a cadence, a perfect cadence on D, because the other chunk of the choir, the other part of the singing had to go on with that in that mode. Otherwise, the choir were lost. And they were able to, if you have different scales, it means that you put semitones and tones in a different way. We just, in major and minor, we only have 2 ways of placing semitones and tones around the scale, right? In the 8-tone system, we have 8 different systems, and so there was much more color, and people were used to listen to music in a different way. So it is important to know the system, but if you compare the very complex explanation of that from Zarlino, for instance, who was the main theorist of the late Renaissance. And then you go to Diruta and you go to Banchieri, that were practitioners that were teaching people how to answer the choir. You will see a simplification of the system. So there are what I'm saying is that if you are interested in trying this earlier style of composition, you just had to follow Banchieri, Cartella Musicale, for instance, or L'Organo Suonarino, and that will give you all you need for playing cadences in the right way. Okay. And then if you want, of course, you can study also Zarlino and know that Glariano was pretending to have a system in a different way, and that there was another theorist who was saying, no, you're right, you're not right, you have to do something else. But this is speculation. I mean, we love as human beings to speculate about everything. So
that's true.
It's an old practice.
For many, many years, you were a church musician, and I'm very interested in that because it kind of informs. It's interesting because I guess now that I never thought I'd be ever looking at Renaissance music or Gregorian music or even 18th century music. I had initially come from a contemporary background, but I am so interested in this, and it's so rich, and it teaches you so much about how to be a musician. I wonder, is the church aspect of it, how does that inform the pedagogy? So in a big way, the whole reason for those modes is for the different, I guess, you mentioned the introit, which is a move, that's a part of the Mass, right? So in the Catholic Mass, there's several movements. I have a question about that. Is it always fixed, a certain mode for a certain part of the Mass?
No, not at all. But there are categories that are more recurrent in a specific tone or mode than others. I think that the deepest influence of the church was the singing itself. Don't forget that before being trained as an organist, you had to know how to sing and how to Sing meant how to solmize, solmization, you know? So you need to know, it's what has been so nicely put by Nicholas Bagaranov in his late book on, last book
Solfeggio
on
tradition, right?
solfeggio tradition, right? Started with the church, started with the before the Gregorian chant, started with this presence of a singing group that was instructed within the church. And for doing so, they created this system of solemnization where you had to be able to sing and to orientate yourself, to navigate this wide range of music that sounded a little bit all the same, but had differences, obviously. So if you want to learn counterpoint, you have to learn first how to sing, and you have to understand the system. What happens sometimes is that we, as modern theorists or musicians, don't pick up everything. We think, okay, some musician, not important.
You're training. That's all it is, yeah.
Now we are training, of course. And we do something that is, how to say, we are forcing out the fundamental skill. We have to be aware of it. If we are aware of it, we sort of make something that fits into the system, and it's maybe more suitable to us. But if we really want to recreate that historical environment, we need to know that we need to be able to sing a fifth, that we need to be able to do a mutation with our voice, so to change hexachord in order to sing always the mi fa, the semitone as mi fa. We need to know a lot of things, and we need to know in which scale we are using, which mode we are using. For them, it was natural. They were listening to a chunk of Gregorian chant, and this is eighth mode. Oh, this is first mode. Oh, I have to go on D, or I have to go on D, or I have to go on E. It was natural because it was coherent. Nowadays, we are living in a completely different world. We have so many different musical styles, so we cannot live in a bubble. Right. I mean, I live in a building that in the 14th century was a church, and now it's a house. I can stay here and sing my Gregorian chant and pretend to be living in the Renaissance. But when I go shopping, I cannot dress up as a 15th century guy.
As a monk.
You're right.
I have a couple of questions, and I had no idea that there were so many chants in I guess the kind of put them all together in the Liber Usualis, right? Is that right? And there are so many of them. And I just wondered, if you were an organist back then, how many melodies were there that were expected to know? Because the church calendar goes through the whole year, right? And I guess you could have a different melody for each week. Is that possible?
It is possible, but it was organized in major feasts and in chants that were repeating over the year. So if you look at what Diruta, Banchieri, and others do, is providing you with the major melodies for the major feast. La Messa della Madonna.
How many are there?
Yeah, so everything that you need for the most important services, and then the hymns that were sung to you at Vespers on several occasions. So that was, the basic. an organist. If you look at the Diruta, you will find a whole section about what is important, what chants are the most used.
And a vesper is, I think is that an evening prayer?
Yeah, it is the evening prayer, and it can be the first vesper. Every solemnity has two vesper. The primi vespri, happening the vigil on the day before, and the secondi vespri, happening on Sunday afternoon, so to say. But there are when we are talking about the chant of the church, we are talking about almost 2,000 years. So we cannot level and then we are also talking about regional traditions that were unified in different historical moments. So it's very difficult to put in an interview what was what. You can look at Venice in the Seicento. You can look at Naples.
And the Seicento, by Seicento you mean is that the Italian for the 17th century?
17th century.
17th century. Okay, interesting. So I interrupted you. You were continuing.
So I was just telling you that we have to be very cautious when we are trying to reconstruct a liturgical tradition. We have to look at the sources. Also, you were mentioning before the Liber Usualis. Liber Usualis is again a creature of the Solesmes monks in the 20th century. It's a reconstruction. It's a revival of the Gregorian chant that unifying several layers of historical praxis. What we could do is to look. I'm living in Cremona. I can go to the library, the archive in Cremona, the cathedral, and look at what they were singing there.
It's amazing.
I will discover that, for instance, they had a different melody for the Magnificat, or they were using a particular hymn, and that there was a little variant on one page in comparison with other traditions. But this is, more important if you are doing historical research than if you are doing improvisation. If you are doing improvisation, what Banchieri and Diruta provides is the common way, because also back in the Renaissance and in the 16th century, they were trying to unify this mess. And everyone was trying to do whatever he liked, and so the Pope and the commissions and there were several attempts to reform the singing and to simplify the chant and to have a version of the chant that was more apt to be the base of the polyphony. It's a very large and amazing work of research.
Right. We talked about singing. Now I'd like to talk about counterpoint instruction. And you have taught counterpoint. You're a counterpoint teacher. And you worked with Peter Schubert, who is known for his innovative singing techniques and other ways of teaching counterpoint. So I'd love to know, you mentioned yourself, it was more of a written thing. You were there, I guess, at ground zero, noticing the change in the way counterpoint was being taught. You yourself teach it, trying to use more of a historical approach that's more hands-on. So can you talk about the effect it's had on your students and if you feel it's more effective than how people have normally done it in the 20th century?
Okay, I have to tell you one thing first. That the effect that he had on me, I was scared to death, when I was doing it for the first time, because it really challenges your way of being out in the world, so to say. You are subject to be mistaken. You are subject to failure. And if you do it in front of a group, it might be psychologically sort of, problematic. But then if you do it in with the right spirit, it is, okay, I've done a mistake. Well, just adapt it, just build on it. It becomes more engaging, and that was we devised the experiment at McGill. Counterpoint was taught in a very ordinary way. And
by the way, what year was this?
It was 2011, 2012.
Okay.
Peter was, of course, using improvisation in his class, but he never had a complete course based on improvisation, and that's what the experience was about. Catherine Motus, Peter, and myself were the instructors of this Counterpoint 101 course, when you really give the basis, and we try to use as much improvisation as possible. That means getting into the classroom and singing the counter famous and making the student reply to that, or making imitations and so on. It worked. It worked, even if the students were at a certain moment, they were kind of lost. And being lost is a good thing, because it means that you are losing control of what you are doing before, and you are looking for new ways. But it was a summer course, that meaning that we were meeting the students every day, every morning, from Monday to Thursday, if I recall correctly. So that was something that on a normal term you cannot do, because the
once a
classes
week, maybe.
once a week. Yeah, timing is extremely important. And then the second warning is that these were students already playing music, making music, living in a context where they were in contact with music. They were not kids of the village taken to the church in order to learn counterpoint. And they were university students, undergraduate students. So their age was different from what we know it was the ordinary age for starting counterpoint classes in the Renaissance. So we had to do a mediation between the ordinary way, the textbook, the exercise, the assignment, the confrontation with harmony, because everybody in the room had a tonal hearing approach, and the old way. We don't want to replicate something that was great in the past and to revamp it just because we want a replica. I don't want to be living in a fake environment. I want a musician who is more capable of understanding what he's doing and how he's doing. And you can use this approach, for.
And how far did it go in terms of expertise? Were you singing? What was the end of the course? What were you guys singing at the end?
I think that I cannot recall exactly. I should take my notes. But it was a 3-part imitation counterpoint or something like that.
Right.
So it was something that pretty loud, and then canons. Canons in 3 voices that are normally perceived as something quite
intimidating,
quite engaging.
challenging.
Yeah, intimidating.
Yeah.
But you know the rules. You try to replicate them and then all these historical methods work if you put time into them. This is the lesson that we have to learn, that we have to go back to a slower pace, that we have to give our body and our mind time in order to absorb things. Otherwise, we are just, having a lot of stimuli, and then we get out with nothing.
Not retaining anything, right?
Yeah,
You have to really
exactly.
take a step back. I have a question about the curriculum. So this is Renaissance counterpoint, but I have really been intrigued by how this older music really makes you a better musician for any other style of music. And I think that was something that was written in Professor Schubert's book, that this will help you with other styles of music. And I had a question regarding what you believe is the core essence of the training. You might not, like you said, become a replica of that era, but what skills do you see that a student get out of it that are perhaps generalized to other eras or whatever they want to do?
Oh, that's a very good question, and we need a conference in order to answer it. My point of view is that we as educators and teachers have to get out to renounce our comfort zone. I've studied counterpoint or Renaissance, and I'm teaching that. I have studied basso continuo, and I'm teaching that. But we are learning that there are so many similarities in the old way, in the old practice. So we should envision a new curriculum, a new way of teaching that brings classical music back to life. That's my most important concern. That I see too many classical musicians that still think that they have to be on a stage playing all their notes and doing the interpretation that they will win a context, that will be a competition if they play all the notes and in that way.
Well, there's a quote in one of your articles. I think it's a quote by H.A.B. Crawford.
Yes.
And he says,
1928.
A pianist, organist, or indeed any musician who's playing is absolutely confined to what has been written by others on paper, and who cannot even modulate readily and musically at the keyboard is but half educated. And that's a strong statement.
Yeah, if you want to give a shot to something completely different, go on YouTube and look for Leonardo Miucci improvising a short prelude to Beethoven's Opus 27 on an historical piano. And that kind of doing music that Adorno would consider as the text, the factoid, the big art, that something that cannot be changed, done in a so elegant and so clever way, making an introduction that is a short prelude, demonstrates to people that you can enjoy music in so many different ways. It doesn't matter if you are dealing with Chopin, if you're dealing with Beethoven, if you're dealing with Frescobaldi, or if you are just improvising a new music. It is the improvisatory approach to music that keeps it alive. And it's something that we were taught to keep aside from the classic, to keep aside from the canon. Look, there are the pop musicians who are, doing whatever they want. Jazz musician, bad people, nasty. They use some dissonances where seventh should be resolving, and they never
they never prepare it, never resolve it.
Of course. But we live in a world that is a mix, is a transcultural world. So we can pick a lesson from one remote part of history and make it right for a lot of other situations. And then, of course, you can live improvisation in many ways. You can use it as a tool for learning. You can use it
Okay,
on
so yeah,
stage.
that's a big question I have now, which is free composition and leading, so improvisation and learning this Renaissance counterpoint. How does that lead to free composition? Now, I understand that with a chance you are provided a cantus firmus, and so with that you kind of have a sort of a form baked in because you have the melody given to you. And so I guess you can build off the cantus firmus. How would somebody have considered, I mean, did they even consider form when they thought about free compositions? Like, for instance, the toccatas that Merulo published, how would they have thought of such free composition, those fantasias?
Oh, wow. It's again a good question. Basically, all the toccatas are arranged in one tone. So they are pieces that could substitute for instance, the introit of the Mass. So if I'm playing a toccata del primo tono, it means that I will make cadences on the primo tono, the first tone. Then there was an old book by Bradshaw, The Origin of the Venetian Toccata, claiming that the main chords, the structure, was referring to the falso bordone and to the tones, which is partially true, I think, still. But of course, if you want to play a toccata, you have to set the environment, and you do it with the first bars. You have these long chords, and if you look at the kind of chords that you will see there, they establish the primo tono, the terzo tono, the ottavo tono, and then at the end you have to go back and make a cadence on it. What is happening in between is to going, for instance, to the corda di recita, to the reciting tone of the sounds, making a cadence, an half cadence. And then you can have a cadenza mediana also and go to another in a pivoting point of that tone. It's something that you learn because you have sung a lot, and it's something that you learn because you have heard many other examples. So all this music is coherent because it had a function that was to stay within the liturgy. Then, of course, when you bring the toccata outside church, for instance, the big harpsichord toccatas, you still have that modal and slightly more tonal oriented way. But if you look at cadences, if you look at the way they are built, they are coherent in this way. And if you are, now we are talking, I'm talking a foreign language to me, but I'm trying to use way of sayings and utterances that are understandable to native speakers. That's something that you do also with music. You don't look at the single note. You look at the structures, at the bigger structures, and you give the illusion to the listener that you are talking okay, even if you are doing some mistakes sometimes, or your pronunciation is not that perfect. It after a while doesn't impede you the communication, and that's what's happening for when you are using historical improvisation for creating free compositions, I guess.
Now, I guess if somebody is listening, they're thinking, I want to learn how to improvise fugues. I want to learn how to improvise canons. It sounds terrifying, intimidating, but so cool. What are the steps somebody should take to go in that direction?
Well, it depends, first of all, on which style she feels more comfortable. If you play a lot of 18th century music, partimento is the leading staircase to heaven, so to say. Because it works, because there are so many scholar works, there are so many excellent players who can show you how to do that. If you feel a little bit more confident with the ancient style, you can take, for instance, Banchieri and try to do what he does. That is basically cadences and build up imitations according to a very simple rules. You can look at Diruta and try to invent your diminutions according to the patterns that he's providing as examples. You can pick up, for instance, Peter Schubert Counterpoint book, which is a modern textbook, mixing up several historical sources, but producing them in a way that are very useful to a modern student. Because you will have some exercises on paper. I mean, paper is not wrong per se.
Just to be clear, right?
Just to be clear, yes, we are not against paper. We love paper. For instance, Diruta says, well, now when you are learning how to intabulate, it is how to make reduction of vocal music in order to be playable at the keyboard, you have to do it on paper, and then you have to write it down by your hand, because while you are doing it, you are learning, because you have the time to look at, for instance, at this several entrances of the motive, and to study them while you're writing. Bach was coping Frescobaldi, Fiori Musicali, and while coping, he was studying and he was absorbing style. Of course, if you send me the PDF, I made no effort because I already have everything. Having everything sometimes is like having nothing. So if you just sit on the keyboard, in front of a keyboard, and you just play a very simple cantus firmus, as Pasquini, for instance, in his Saggi Contrapunto does, the first cantus firmus is just one single note. And this is the nightmare for every counterpoint, because you have so many limitations. And I mean, but still it takes the space on the paper to write an obvious thing, because it's not obvious at all, because it forces your mind to think that, oh, well, I can have a unison, I can have a third, I can have a fifth, no, I cannot have a fourth, I can have a seven, no ways, and so on, and I have to build a melody. And when I'm so confident to play that, which is so stupid, I can play a cadence at the end. And the cadence is made at tam pa pa pa. This is the most normal cadence, and is that little movement.
Do I have to know those terms? Cantizans, tenorizans, bassizans. Must I know these things?
Well, names are cool, right? But they are just names. They're labeling something. If you are able to do them at the keyboard, you can skip the names. But of course, you have to learn to know that there are several kinds of cadences and clausulae, and that you have to know how to use them coherently. Then you can label them Milfred or John or whatever. Names are not important. Names are a trick for helping our memory, for collecting data. We need names. Of course, I'm hilarious now, but
I get the point. Yeah. You mentioned Pasquini, who is a subject of an article that you have created, and people know him as perhaps the founder, I guess, or at least somebody who is one of the pioneers of the partimento method. And could you talk about him, his influence, and why he's significant?
Well, the dear Bernardo is one of the most important musicians in Rome. He worked with Corelli, for instance. They were playing together. He developed this style, picking up from Frescobaldi, from the creativity of Frescobaldi, but orienting the music toward a more tonally coherent space, so to say. And Frescobaldi was crazy, right? He was making a lot of experiments. He was pushing the system to its ends and creating something new. In order to
So
be
just really quickly, what do you mean by that? Because for people who don't know, they think of him as a master of the Renaissance keyboard. But what exactly was he pushing?
Well, he was pushing the way that you are creating music. If you look at his toccatas, they are made of a lot of motifs, but these motifs are developed in a way that is not the way that we are developing motifs after him. They were chunked, they were distorted, they were transposed, they were left apart for a moment, and then there was a new idea, and then there was a diminution coming out from that, and then it was a point of rest, and then something else happened.
Yeah.
It was a structure that was really dramatic and coming out from the sound of the instrument. But if you look at how his students organized the music after him, for instance, Froberger, it's done slightly differently, because you have, an introduction when you have these sort of free motifs, and then you have a motive that is developed in a sort of fugal way, with regular entrances, and then maybe shorter entrances, and then there is a cadence, and then there is another section with free material. Frescobaldi is mixing up everything. Frescobaldi wants to try how it feels in a very abrupt way. Okay? And Pasquini is sort of bringing this style to another degree of maturity, going to towards a more tonal oriented space. Okay, and it's so important because he starts writing these sonate a due bassi, for instance, and is writing the 100 versetti, and is writing the collection of saggi di contrapunto, and is writing music but no words to explain how to delve in the style. And so he is using a sort of basso continuo that has polyphonic implications. Many of the figures are not only telling us which chords to use, but also they give us a hint of the line, of the melodic line that they are implying, which is something very similar to partimento, right? So he was important in that perspective, because, and then he was a great teacher. He had many students, so he influenced a lot of musicians around the world. That's the main point. And his style maybe is a little bit easier for a modern ear to understand and to master than Frescobaldi, because of what I've said before.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Very good. Oh, can you just talk about working with William Porter too? Because you've worked with him on the organ. So, what did you get out of your collaboration with him?
Bill is a gentleman, and he has a deep breath. And when you breathe into music, you make your personality in what you are. And he is always so elegant in the way he teaches, in the way he performs, in the way he chats with you. That's the main point I got from him. That is, social relationships are so important. But more seriously, he is a very good listener. So when you are finished, he just touches his words and say, well, you did something that was a little bit, and then he plays exactly what you played, or he asks you to play back what you did, and you are in total despair because you have forgotten. But he had noticed, and he points out that not because he won't say shame on you, but because that is a very crucial point in the structure, or you just had an idea that you were not able to develop. So teaching is still a very personal way, especially if you're dealing with improvisation. So that's the main point. And of course, a deep knowledge of the repertoire, especially when we are dealing with historical improvisation. We are speaking the language of the dead. And being dead, they left us a lot of music. So in order to be fluent in that style, you need to play a lot of pieces. I mean that's what Diruta was saying, and we go back to the beginning. At a certain point, he gives you a certain amount of ricercars and toccatas to study and to know how the style is, and then he says, go and listen to what they are doing. Mozart, when he visits the Sistine Chapel, he goes and listens and replicates. Every musician goes and absorbs whatever he has around. So curiosity is the key for learning, I'm sure.
When did you meet Professor Giorgio Sanguinetti, and when did you learn about partimento now? You talked a little bit about it for the 18th century, and could you just talk about that topic, because that's also very, very popular now as well?
Oh, yeah, of course. Well, I met Giorgio at McGill because he was visiting professor during my postdoc. So, as two Italians in a cold country.
Time for a cappuccino, right?
Meetings. No, we had a stew. We had a meat stew. I was quite good at cooking, and so he came several times. And he was.
What year was that?
It was 2011. It was just before his book was out. So he was working in a doctoral seminar, and I was following it. And he presented some chapters of his book in as a proofreading, and actually we had many conversations, and there is a strong continuity between what was happening in the Renaissance and what the Neapolitan school has brought to a peak. So we had many conversation, and I started a little bit on partimenti, but I never wanted to go too far, at least publicly, because I'm more on another side. But it's a very incredible how there is a continuity line between the tradition.
People say that a lot of this stems out of Italy, and looking at the history of the Renaissance, there are some Franco-Flemish people. I think Josquin de Prix was French, I believe. Yeah. Rather than nationalities, is this more of a church thing, a Catholic church thing?
Well, of course, Catholic Church was an important thing, but all these composers were traveling, and they were working also in Italy, many of them. So we think of Renaissance. We have to think as Renaissance as a constellation of musical and art centers linked together because of social and power connections, because of art connections, because of economical things. So even at that time, there was a web of communication. Even at that time, Ferrara, for instance, was one of the place to be in the world, and was attracting musicians. Mantua was another of it. And if you look on the map, they are quite close in comparison with, the extension of the geography of the United States. But at that point, they created such a web, and then music was traveling. There were agents looking for manuscripts in Rome to be sent in South Germany, or in Germany, or in Poland. They were there were musicians transcribing what they got from Rome in a more understandable notation. That was the German organ tablature, because they were not able to read the Italian kind. There are so many layers of complexity. It's really fascinating to me that.
In the middle of, I think the Reformation was a very momentous happening that happened in the middle of the 16th century. And then there was the Council of Trent with a counter-Reformation. Did any of that have any effect on perhaps the music that was made? For instance, I believe this might be legendary, but they were saying that Palestrina, his music was kind of, his mass kind of made the case for polyphony. And in the writing of the music in that time, did we see any change over the 16th century and into the 17th century?
There are many changes, and the reference to the Missa Pape Marcelli is of course a part of legend and part of true. But the big divide was obviously the Reformation, was the great intuition of Luther that the folk, the people had to sing. You know, singing was in the Catholic Church, and still is, primarily something related to a choir of professionals and clerics. And ordinary people had to follow, or they developed another tradition that is not recorded, has not been written down, but it's important and it's there. For instance, the fraternities, the lay groups, having a sort of semi-private devotion system, going along with the official rite, is something that is very widespread in Italy at that time, and still is. But with Reformation, you have, easy chorales, the folk lead you have, that has the fundament of the church. Luther says, we preach the gospel, but also the organist when he's playing a fantasy is preaching the same word of God. So there is this big tradition that flourishes against, but Luther was a monk, so he was trained in that system. So he took some piece of the system and transposed to that other environment. Of course, the history is much more complex than this, but and this attitude towards the singing as a collective action also influenced the organs, the size of the organs, and the way that the organs were used, and even the placement of the instrument in the church was changed because of that. If you look at Italian Renaissance organs, they are in the choir, close to the altar, because that's the center of the music. They are up in the balcony. They are not in the West Gallery close to the people, because the function in the space was different. If you look at the big organs in a Reformed church, they are inside the building. They are much more into their dialogue between the big congregation. They need a lot of foundation stops. They need a lot of sound in order to make people singing. And of course, there are several traditions. Some of them were not singing. That's complex.
Yeah. Oh, that's really fascinating, and I had no idea that liturgical use had so much influence on music, and then subsequently how music was taught. Just for a little bit of fun, Professor Guido, can I just ask you, who are your favorite composers from that period of the late Renaissance, in terms of organ or keyboard works?
Oh, you are doing a lot of tough questions, guy. So I would say Paolo Quagliati,
Okay.
and Luzzasco Luzzaschi, and it's not late Renaissance, but it's early Baroque. My love, Frescobaldi.
Why the first two names? What do you like about their compositions and their works?
Well, Quagliati is a little known composer, but he was extremely important when he moved to Rome. He wrote a lot of music that is lost or still in the archives. But he is one uh, of the creators of the Venetian school, and along to Merulo. And well, honestly, I wanted to say Merulo, but I wanted to cast a name that was not so so common in order to raise some curiosity. And then Luzzaschi is the teacher of Frescobaldi, is the connecting point between the Flemish tradition of counterpoint and the revolution that Frescobaldi would have done in a few years. He is the initiator of the Concerto delle Dame, the wonderful group of singers that in the castle of Ferrara were experimented this lavishly ornamented music that had to express the sweetness of the effects. He wrote wonderful music, and much of them is lost, but is extremely important. And then of course Frescobaldi, because he's the genius, is the one who's able to connect the two ways of making music, the so-called stile antico with the stile moderno. He was a master of counterpoint. If you look at his Fantasia, his Ricercare, they are full of wit and full of devices. He was able of a degree of complexity that it's really unbelievable, especially if we follow the historians who tell us that he was also able to improvise that way. My gosh. And then the counterpoint is still in his toccatas, because if you look at how he shapes the lines, even if he's using a very idiomatic style with the instrument, he says that his music comes to life only when you are playing, when you are just enjoying the sound of the quillings, plucking the instruments. You still see the polyphonic mind, you still see the counterpoint mind and going on. And that's the subject of my forthcoming book, so I'm making a little bit of commercial here.
No, of course.
I've been working on Frescobaldi for so many years, and now time has come for finishing this book that sort of connects the two polarities and try to give the idea of the extremely fascinating way of thinking music at the keyboard, for the keyboard, in the sound of the instrument, which is another great lesson to me, I believe.
Are there any composers that you feel that are unjustly kind of ignored but are really important that you think people should know?
Well, a lot of Italian composers are known less than what they should be, and that is because big publishers are always republishing the big names that we already know. That's a marketing strategy. Or people are not going to the archives and dig out composers. For instance, we had a wonderful scholar, Armando Carideo, who started 20 years ago a new series, and he published more than 40 volumes of Italian music, from Bagheri to Spiridione to Mattia Vendi, to collections of anonymous music. We tend to go for the big names, no? But another way to go is to publish collections as they are in that library or in that particular place, because they tell us as a collection of what they were looking at in music. And so we discover music that maybe is not so elegant or is not so well composed, but is a hint of a learning process. Sometimes we think that what is in a book is at his final stage. Our forebears teaches us that sometimes they were writing in order to aid memory. So we have wonderful collections of verses and little fugues. They are little more than improvised sketches. And if they are little more than improvised sketches, it means that you have to be creative and you cannot play them as they are, that you have to add and then you have to elaborate on it. And so there is a lot of music that is out there. Obviously, Pasquini should be played more and more, and it's happening. And also others. I mean, all the Neapolitans, Rocco Rodio, Antonio Valente, and Maione, Trabaci, all these guys are, I mean, they are, of course, they are a little bit more complex and a little bit more out of date. And then another issue is where, when and on which instrument do you play them? I'm not an extremist. I don't say that you need the right instrument to play the right music. You can play Frescobaldi on a piano. It sounds quite nicely, but you have to be aware of that you are forcing the music and forcing the system towards something that was not meant for. And then you have to take action. You need to have an image of the sound, of the historical sound, and then you can elaborate on that, going to other directions. Of course, the best way is to go and have a good replica of an historic instrument and to enjoy it, but it's not always possible, right? So our brain has a very strong imaginative power, and we have to use it. We have a lot of good recordings, for instance. You can play Frescobaldi on a piano, but you please go and listen to good recordings of historical harpsichords.
Oh, can you recommend good recordings? Who are some good recording artists who play in a historical manner that you like?
Well, I mentioned already Edoardo Bellotti. Among the Italians, I would say Francesco Cera has recently published Frescobaldi collections, but there are many others. One of my favorite players is Catalina Vicens. She is an Argentinian working in Basel and in the Netherlands, and she has published wonderful CDs. One of them is on the most ancient playable Italian harpsichord, the 1525 Terzotino at Vermilion, South Dakota. And she plays beautifully because she connects her body and her mind to the keyboards, the early keyboards. I insisted a lot in my work on recreating this deep connection between music theory, improvisation, and keyboard technique. That is something that maybe some other colleagues sort of not consider important because they are much worried of re-establishing, the theoretical argument or the performative argument. But really, if we go to the core, the sound is important. Improvisation or historical methods teaches us to connect deeply to the instrument. That means that if you are pushing a key lever that is 500 years old, it has an agency, it has a power, it has something that you have to control, but you need to be also controlled by the instrument. You need to find a way to see if your ways of touching it are changing the sound. You don't have to impose your way of being. It's a dialogue between you, the instrument, and the music. And when you are improvising, the dialogue is a little easier because you are creating the music according to the instrument, and that's another incredibly rewarding way of using improvisation, and that's my preferred way. Sitting alone in my house, playing my clavichord and letting the instrument tell me what to play or how to play it. It's a private dimension, of course, but it's so nourishing for the mind and body that I recommend everyone to do that. It's safe, yeah, because you are alone, but it's the first step of getting some confidence and understanding how to deal with the sound of an instrument.
Now, related to the sound, which you just mentioned, what is the tuning or the temperament that you believe is appropriate for music of the Renaissance, the late Renaissance, for the keyboard works?
Well, we know that they were using a bunch of temperaments that we call mean tone. The so-called quarter comma mean tone is the standard way of dealing with it. But actually, if we go into the sources, we see that there are several descriptions of something like that. But what is important that with mean tone temperaments, the thirds are pure and the fifths are narrower than what we are used to. So if we combine and the way that the third stretches or tighten is antagonist to the fifths. So you cannot have at the same time good fifths, perfect fifths, and perfect.
There has to be some compromise.
There is a compromise. So the equal temperament goes in favor of the fifths. And that because, the cycle of the fifths that makes playable all the tonality and so on and so forth. But it makes the perfect chords, 3-5, more ramshackle than the quarter comma, where the third is pure. And the magic is that when you have a pure third and you have the fifth that is really not so good, you perceive the beauty of the third. So it's much more, we were talking before about euphonia in the Renaissance, no? It gives you fewer beats in the harmonics, and so you perceive this as a full round consonance. You need a temperament that gives you the flower of the difference between a dissonance and a consonance. And of course, then you can adjust your keyboard. If you're an harpsichordist, you can touch up your tuning quite well. You can experiment.
Great. And I guess I'll combine the last two: chordal invertibility, harmonic theory, tonal harmony, and contrast that with what we've been talking about, I guess, for the past hour. Do you find that they can be reconciled? There are two different things. They are just for different eras. So you apply different styles, different tools for different eras. What's your thought on that? Some people have very strong opinions. Some people say, I hate tonal harmony and I hate all of this stuff, the chordal Roman numerals, chordal invertibility. Some people are more generous. They're like, you know what? It actually can be very useful for analysis and for other things. I'd love to know what your opinion of this very big topic is.
Again, how many hours do I have? Well, I think we cannot make the same mistake twice. German theorists neglected Italian perspectives, and that was a big mistake. Now, if we, as scholars of the 21st century, just take this stand and say, well, forget Roman numerals, forget Rameau theory, forget this, forget that, how can we talk about Bruckner? How can we talk about Mendelssohn? How can we talk about, serialism? We are living in a time arrow that goes on, and we are on the ride, luckily. So we cannot cast away that system because we are part of the system. Of course, we have to decide what is more important. There is a big debate now in academia if we have to get some space to other kind of musics, to other traditions, and this brings issues of race and equality and diversity and so on and so forth. So what if we cannot learn everything, we cannot forget what we are, but we can be open to diversity. So if I have a system which is flexible, and what the commonality of these old systems is that they are much more flexible than the one that we were talking before. Well, maybe we could work on this aspect in order to create a new path. Can we improvise a canon in the Renaissance style and a raga in the same classroom? Do we have the ability to get to escape from our comfort zone as theorists or as teachers and to mix up things? It's a challenge, of course, but I think that we cannot erase tonal harmony and invertible and Roman numerals. They are there. They are part of our tradition.
And
we
function
have to deal
theory
with them.
as well, the Riemann and all of that.
They are a powerful tool of analysis for a certain repertoire. So I think that a music theorist who doesn't know it is what Adriano Banchieri would call an organist who was not able to play Fantasia, a donkey playing the lyre. So there are donkeys are wonderful animals, wonderful creatures, and music theorists as well. But we have our own identity. So if somebody is more comfortable with Roman numerals and Riemann, why not?
Oh, well, very profound words, very magnanimous words, and really a master on this area of music and the Renaissance and Baroque. Thank you so much, Professor Guido. Let me just mention again that he is the editor of the wonderful Studies in Historical Improvisation from Cantare Super Librum to Partimenti. Professor Guido, please, can you tell my audience, what do you have planned for the second half of the year, and what other projects and articles or books or conferences you have in store?
Well, I've done my teaching, and something that I'd like to mention is that next year, for the first time in history in the Italian university musicology system, I will teach a course called History, Forms and Technique of Improvisation. And this is a big achievement, because Italian musicology is in a way very conservative and in the other very open to changes. And this will be the first university master course on improvisation. And we have a wonderful curriculum with more than 12 musicologists at the department, and I'm proud of being part of that. I'm working on my Frescobaldi's book, and I've just finished an essay on music iconography about the organ and the balcony of the Santa Maria di Brera, that was the church in Milan where the art gallery now is, that got lost and got fragmented. And then I'm working on another pedagogy project that's still in the blue, so I'm a little bit silent on it.
Great. Well, and also, how can they contact you if they're very interested in what we talked about today?
Oh, well, go to the musicology department of the Pavia University, and you will find my name
and maybe I'll put your contact to information in the show notes, and then people can reach out to you.
It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, it's really been a pleasure, Professor Guido. I hope you had a good time on the show, and
Yeah, great
I
time.
hope you enjoyed the questions. And I really would love to talk to you again when perhaps that book on Frescobaldi comes out, and the rest of your wonderful research. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, likewise. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Cheers.